Saga Anderson, an FBI agent alongside her senior colleague Alex Casey, goes on to investigate a recent murder connected to a series of murders in Cauldron Lake, located in Bright Falls, which tormented Alan Wake, putting him in the dark place. We see an unexplained scene of Alan having a bullet in his head, which is quite bright, talking about how horror stories have victims and monsters. This is followed by a prologue scene depicting the murders happening by a cult known as the Cult of the Tree, who are somehow connected to the Taken, the possessed townsfolk who are overtaken by darkness. Arriving at the scene, meeting Deputy Mulligan and Thornton, Saga enters her mind space, a representation of her mind in a tangible form where she has all the clues for cases that she can access and come to conclusions. Investigating the scene and observing the body, Alex mentions he knew the victim as Robert Nightingale, an ex-FBI agent who gave in to drinking, telling stories that he saw ghosts, but of course people dismissed it as paranoia. As a matter of fact, someone who investigated the dark place himself. He went missing 13 years ago, which is consistent with the other victims, which could link to the dark place, a place Alan Wake faced and was challenged by. The Cauldron Lake has a well-known legend amongst the locals that a witch was drowned in the lake and her cauldron grew into a tree. For revenge, her soul or darkness drowned the sheriff who caused her death, whom she uses as a vessel to come out of the lake and kill others who did her wrong. A very familiar story corresponding with the dark place. The duo soon come across a page left on the wet ground, written with a typewriter and corrected later with a pen, written by none other than Alan Wake, who is trying to find a way to leave the dark place by writing extensions to the already grim story. As his writings come to life, but needing to be in a horror sense, a horror story, he writes exactly what is happening. A story about Saga finding the page while investigating the murder, a note despite its menacing and sinister nature, drawing them, or specifically her, further into this rabbit hole. Saga clearly understands the author is manipulating the events to create his own narrative, not sure what for, yet she is fully in for it, hooked to get to the bottom of it all. After some investigation, they go to the town to meet with Sheriff Breaker in order to question the witnesses who saw the murder. Talking to the bookers, the witnesses, with the woman being the writer who came to write about Alan Wake's mysterious missing case, they witnessed the cult members repeatedly saying the Cult of the Tree, with Robert Nightingale emerging from the lake and running in his underwear, being extremely scared and shouting. Being in the Oh Dear Diner, Saga is called by the waitress Rose, a prominent character in the series, who acts as if she knows Saga and mentions something morbid, that her daughter, Logan, drowned in the lake, which low-key frustrates Saga, who tries to act professional. Based on the first game, it wouldn't be a surprise if Rose is being influenced by the dark place, or if Alan Wake is writing the narrative, so Rose would say something like this, causing Saga to investigate the lake and as a result directly communicate with Alan. Going to the morgue and having a closer inspection on the body, Saga finds another note left inside the chest cavity where the heart used to be, yet again written by Alan, specifically mentioning Saga Anderson's name on how they are involved in the story. Sheriff Breaker then mentions that he has found similar pages like that. When trying to take them to Saga, the dark place emerges, awakening a dead Nightingale, making the pages disappear alongside Sheriff Breaker. Following the instructions in the pages, Saga enters the light, witnessing something very strange, that the walking corpse of Nightingale cannot see anyone within any source of light. Nightingale walks around hurting anyone in his way, saying that he's looking for a clicker, a light switch, seemingly the clicker Alan used in the first game to destroy the woman in black. After managing to defeat Nightingale, he disappears when Saga finds another page, predicting what is to follow, or in other words, an elaborate instruction for Saga to follow, written in a way as if it's a story with each event following one another. Alan describes Nightingale being a taken yet not one. one, whom Saga has to follow in the lake, where a place is found known as the Overlap, a place between reality and a dark place. While on their way to the lake, Casey mentions that he has been receiving strange notes in his mail, which were from Alan Wake's book, with a series of murders copycatting his crime book Murder Stories, theorizing that maybe some cult followers wanted to bring Alec back through these sadistic rituals. Interestingly, Alex Casey was one of Alan Wake's characters too, having the same job, which happens to be a coincidence at least to them, or what they think. In the national park of the Cauldron Lake, Saga and Alex separate to find a way to access the Overlap. Saga has her first encounter with Takens, similarly to the last games in the series, requiring the light of the flashlight to weaken their dark shield so they can become vulnerable to gunshots. Managing to go to the Overlap through the ladle tree of the witch, Saga loses her communication with Alex. In this strange place, having remnants of people in the real world and the dark place, Saga manages to find Alan Wake, who in panic stresses his evil doppelganger Scratch has managed to get out and corrupt the story in his place, making the dark place more powerful. Soon, Alex Casey joins them, which reveals that they are actually back in the real world now, and not the Overlap or the Dark Place. Finding a letter while searching the area, she finds a letter by the Federal Bureau of Control that they have been experimenting in the Cauldron Lake, as they had become aware that there is some sort of supernatural power which targets artists and writers, making their art and fiction turning into reality. They have been using nursery rhymes and dolls to see if they can achieve similar results. This bureau is of course the one found in another game called Control, where they investigate altered world events, or in short AWE, which directly links the universe of the two games together. Taking Alan with them, Alex and Saga interrogate him to why he would write the notes and involve them in his twisted story when Alan acts surprised, considering the possibility that his evil double might have written the note, especially as the name of the author was heavily scratched when he struggles to remember finally having the memory of a talk show that he attended to, asking him about a new book called Initiation that he wrote, which he has no memory of. The talk show host reads synopsis of the book on how it is a very meta book, that it's about a writer trapped in his writing room trying to find a way out, writing a story essentially about himself to leave the prison that he's been placed in. That's when the show comes to an end, with the lights turning off and everyone disappearing, but not before the host asks if everyone, including the guests, are simply his creation in his book, a fictional story that has come to reality, yet not being real. While exploring the studio in confusion and darkness, Alex explains he's never heard of this show or the host, confused to whether it's all a figment of his imagination or not. Trying to run away from the studio, Alan gets overtaken by darkness, awakening in the familiar attic which he was trapped in by the dark place to write stories non-stop, creating darkness and monsters, a perfect vessel to be used by the darkness to create whatever they wanted. This leads to Alan finding this place familiar and looking up at a board with penned ideas for the draft of a new book called Initiation. Nothing that he remembers, with the ideas describing the nightmare he was just in, the unreal creation and reality of his stories. Despite being a real nightmare, Alan learns something important, that maybe he can go deeper and deeper into the creations of his writing, finding a way out into the real world, despite these sub-dimensions only being within the dark place. However, if he would use real-life characters and real places, maybe he would find a wormhole into the real world, hence how the Overlap was possibly created, being a vessel for him to leave using the help of Saga. Alan carries on writing more about the show, continuing his elaborate route for escape, where Alex Casey, the character of his book, is also invited in the show, being an actor by the name Sam Lake, as the Alex Casey books have been turned into a movie. This depicts how the stories Alan writes come into living and breathing realities, which could reveal a dark truth that maybe Alex Casey and Saga Anderson, the FBI agents, might be in fact fictional characters and not real human beings, characters that are living in their own stories and thinking that they are alive. The story becomes very convoluted because the story of Saga Anderson and Alex Casey align with what Alan had precisely written. The show is cut short when Alan finds himself on the TV, slowly losing his mind on how the dark place is a living thing, real yet not, trying to make Alan drown, feeding off his mind. The dark truth is revealed that he has written many stories before which he has forgotten, stories to open the path for him to leave, but no matter what or how many stories, they get wiped and Alan fails to leave, with the darkness growing larger and larger. Leaving the studio into the street, he is faced with the unfinished version of New York having a call waiting for him on the payphone. The unknown man on the phone directs Alan to get to the Cauldra Street station, saying there's no point introducing himself as Alan would forget again, yet reassuring him that he is a friend. Finding fragments of his past in the writing room, whenever Alan would get his consciousness back, he would keep writing to himself as reminders that writing is the key, art is the key. That is the way that he could get out of this place outside of reality. But unfortunately, he was constantly in a state of amnesia due to the dark place feeding on his mind. Hence why it took 13 years for him to find a way out, and that is, if the world Alex Casey and Saga Anderson are in is not a creation of Alan's writings. Trapped in his own mind, the story becomes more and more twisted as he finds the living and breathing Alex Casey who confronts Alan, saying that a series of crimes and murders are being committed following the stories of Alan, accusing him if he is their leader, which in a convoluted way mixes the stories of Alan, the real life, how his stories came to life, and how he is in his own story trying to make a portal leaving the dark place. The strategy of Alan terrifies him as he sees the potential of how dangerous his stories are, and that the detective Casey could actually kill him. When he goes to investigate a sound, getting shot in there, saying how he keeps on dying here in a loop, as it is written in the story. Alan is shocked to how his stories and characters come to life, and the story entirely becomes mind-bending as Alan was the one who created the character Alex Casey. And does that mean Alex Casey and the real world alongside Saga are just fragments of his stories, or are actual reality? The fractured reality on his stories are also meta and self-referencing, that the advertisements in the subway even point towards how Alan needs to carry a flashlight and how he has a doppelganger while referring to identity theft and power outages. Exploring the fictional reality, Alan also encounters Tim Breaker, the sheriff of Bright Falls, who is looking for a mystery man called Warland Dorr, which Alan initially thinks of the talk show host. Alan, while exploring the subway, adds a segment to the story which transforms and changes the reality as he is within it, depicting the powers of his writing, how they come to reality with the manipulations of the dark place. This reality shows fragments of other characters within the Bright Falls. Tammy Booker, one of the witnesses in the scene of the murder of Nightingale, who went to Bright Falls from New York investigating the missing case of Alan Wake, as she was a writer herself, writing about Alan. This fragment echoes the sound of Tammy saying how Alan wrote stories about crime and murders, and the cultists followed his stories like instructions how to kill as a twisted ritual, with Alan actually having a part in it all, going with the alias Mr. Scratch, the nickname to the devil himself. This could indicate Alan's evil doppelganger, Scratch, actually possessed the same creativity of Alan, writing these crime stories and murders specifically for the cult of the tree to enact them. In his exploration, Alan has to manipulate parts of the story to open his path to freedom, and for that, he meticulously rewrites the heinous crimes of the cult on how they massacred their victims. That's when Alan suddenly comes across the presence or vision of Saga Anderson, having the conversation that she had with him while at the lake, with the corpse of Nightingale and his heart being the key when the reality changes and the Parliament Tower appearing, the place that Alan lived with his wife Alice. This could mean in fact that Alan unintentionally led the cult of the tree to commit these crimes while thinking they are not real and only happening in the dark place, in order to get out. And it's very likely the cult also wanted to bring Alan out of the dark place, somehow communicating with him and following his stories and committing the murders. It's all very twisted. And also, as we saw, the darkness possessed these cult members, so maybe the darkness, harnessing the powers of Alan's writings, commit these heinous crimes. Getting yet another call on the payphone, the mysterious person explains the murder site in the subway was in reality the overlap, where he could communicate with the real world. That's when the person on the phone starts talking about the dark place, on how it can already manifest as him as the doppelganger Scratch when the line drops. Going to the Parliament Tower subsequently, hoping that Alice is actually out of the dark place, as in the first game he sacrificed himself to let Alice out. He sees fragments of their memories, with the possibility that Scratch is stalking Alice in the real world if she is out there and still alive. Exploring their apartment exactly how he remembers it, he finds a tape recorded by his wife Alice. Alice explains a summary of her perspective of how they met and what has been happening with her. She explains how she was a photographer, but she didn't make much, unlike Alan, who was a successful writer. They met each other in New York and headed right off. Heading a writer's block, Alex books a trip to Washington, close to Bright Falls, to see a doctor and help him. But she didn't mention it until they arrived, which led to an argument. She doesn't seem to remember much of what happened, thinking he drowned and everyone else thinking that too, which she blames herself for it. Things went on until 6 years ago when Alice started hearing noises at night, typewriter clicks and voices, thinking it's Alan hunting her. She explains the hunting became violent, believing that it is Alan, clearly being Scratch and not him. After months of taunting and traumatizing her, she decides to set up cameras and motion sensors, deciding to turn the huntings into pieces of art, creating an exhibition which she calls The Dark Place, with a haunting image of Alan Wake at the entrance door in a dark room. This art created by Alice after their visit to Bright Falls, which led to Alan's disappearance, where he created the character Scratch by mistake, led to him going to Alice, forcing her create the Dark Place. Therefore, the story is a mind-bending loop with no beginning or end, with Alice being the one creating the Dark Place in the first place, as the Dark Presence preyed on artists to create horrifying realities, which led to the Dark Place existing, with Alan Wake the center of it, leading to Alan becoming hunted by the Dark Place and creating Scratch, the doppelganger he mistakenly created as his own meta self to escape the Dark Place. This all is an elaborate loop where the Dark Presence or whatever supernatural event caused a time fracture and a loop, linking both Alice and Alan to create this nightmarish world, and both depended on each other to create it. That's when Alan interacts with the image and goes to the writer's room again, realizing he wrote the book Initiation to project himself in it, in order to escape, but instead, he seemingly created Scratch and a perfect loop, with Scratch starting to write the book Return. He then finds the corpse of himself at the writer's room desk, seeing himself being possessed and eaten by the Dark Presence. Back in the room with Alex and Saga being interrogated by them, he tries to explain the best way he can that Scratch is the manifestation of the Dark Presence in the shape of Alan, who wants to rewrite the pages to get his own ending, an ending where he is free to no limits. But Alan, as he did before, changing the ending to save Alice and giving a different ending, he needs to find his lamp clicker to send Scratch back to the Dark Place and stop him, or the Dark Presence interchangeably, and stop the spread and manipulations of the Dark Place. Alan even explains that he doesn't know what he can trust and what he can't remember, saying that the pages Saga found is probably edited by Scratch to hurt Saga, as she seems to be the only way Alan can escape and save the world. As Saga investigated the cult activities, being good at solving cases, and by chance stumbling upon Alan Wake's case, and that meant Scratch would lose the battle, hence why he wants to hurt Saga and put a stop to their investigation. The perspectives changing, Saga uses her mind space to find out Alan is hiding a few pages. Asking Alan for the pages, he passes them to her, which reveal her next steps to go to a trailer and face a cult member who has the magical clicker. Alan needs to get rid of Mr. Scratch. It appears that Scratch and Alan are connected, and it's as if Scratch got out because Alan did, or vice versa. Going to the lake and eventually to the trailer, she finds a newspaper with an article about her daughter Logan drowning in the lake, which terrifies Saga, going back to what Rose, the waitress, said. She realizes that Scratch is trying to hurt her by writing the horror story, which corresponds with the townsfolk even having their memories adjusted to the stories, depicting that it will become a reality if she is not fast enough in finding the clicker. She then leaves the trailer for the story in the page written to become true, with a cult member being none other than Deputy Mulligan appearing before walking away. This portrays that all the deputies, including Thornton, could be a cult member as well, complicating the story even more. Following Mulligan, she faces both him and Thornton in the basement of the cult hideout, where she sees the clicker before they disappear in thin air. Finding a page, she is instructed that there is an overlap in the location that she is in, Watery, which she goes to in order to retrieve the clicker. After defeating the taken Thornton and Mulligan, Saga sees visions of Wake again in the overlap, who explains that Scratch wants to escape and that he wrote Saga's family in his stories to create a way to escape and defeat Scratch, which confuses Saga to why she's seeing him in the overlap, as he is already out. Are these visions from the past, or is the Wake who is out now as a figment of Wake's creation in his stories, only being an echo and not the real him? Or is this a time loop, with the past and the future all being jumbled up and overlapping? He explains he wrote Saga to be the hero of the story and it is only her who can save everyone. Now, with the clicker in hand, she goes back to face this Alan Wake in the safe house to hand it over and find out what's really happening. Meanwhile, worried for her daughter's safety, she keeps calling her husband David, which constantly goes on voicemail, worrying her even more that her daughter drowning has a high possibility. While on her way to Bright Falls, several members of the cult, all seemingly being the townsfolk, attack Casey and Wake, wanting to kidnap Wake when Casey bravely goes on to fend off against them, saying something very similar when Alex Casey in the dark place, the detective called Casey, fictional character of Alan, said before being killed, as if in reality he is his creation, while Alex even challenges Wake in Bright Falls of stealing his identity and watching him. Alan, in search for Casey, gets attacked by a familiar townsfolk who is a member of the cult when he narrowly gets saved by Saga. Just as she tries to help Alan, people from FBC, or Federal Bureau of Control, appear, dismissing Saga of her investigation, taking Alan with them, labeling him as a para-utilitarian, someone capable of wielding paranatural power by binding to objects of power. Saga, not trusting the members of FBC, holds on to the clicker, not giving it to them, not willing to lay off the case despite being officially dismissed. That's when the reality shifts to the dark place, with Alan Wake being called on the telephone to meet the mysterious caller in the Ocean View Hotel, when he gets confronted with the cold and the hard-at-work Detective Casey holding him when he shoots him in defense with a gun he didn't have, which appears out of nowhere, as if the dark place is infecting him and controlling him. Finally meeting the mysterious caller, it turns out to be none other than Thomas Zane, or Tom Zane, a poet who went to the Cauldron Lake in 1970 with his wife, Barbara Jagger. Unfortunately, the wife drowns in the lake, and as a result, being instructed by someone, Tom writes a poet to bring his wife back, knowing the lake has supernatural abilities, making fiction into reality. Unfortunately, this also brings the dark presence out in form of the wife possessing her, in a way linking to the witch in the lake and the ladle tree. Understanding Barbara is not the same anymore, he kills her and rewrites his poem to destroy the entirety of the lake and everything else in it, which could be how the volcano erupted. Zane then puts on a diving suit, which we see in the first game, taking the body of his wife, jumping into the lake, descending deep into the dark place, sacrificing himself to save humanity, causing the bright presence challenge the dark presence. It also turns out as a contingency plan. If the darkness was not destroyed, he wrote another poem, creating the character Alan Wake, a writer who would come and destroy the dark place and the presence using his magical clicker. The story goes that Alan was always afraid of the dark and monsters, hence why his mother gave him a lamp with the clicker, saying whenever he clicked the lamp, the monsters would all perish. Hence the muse for his stories and how he can defeat them, and why the clicker is the ultimate weapon against the dark place. However, in another poem, Zane created a pocket dimension where he would live happily with his wife Barbara. In Alan Wake 1, Zane's presence became the bright presence, guiding Alan to safety and leaving his manuscripts as instructions to defeat the dark place, exactly how Alan is guiding Saga now as the new hero. This brings the question if all of this is not a fictional story, with Alan being a fictional character created in a parallel universe becoming the reality himself. The woman in the black in the first game turns out to be also Barbara Jagger, who is possessed by the dark presence, luring and tricking Alan into writing the story. In return, when already deep in battle against the dark presence and almost defeated, Alan writes another story that Zane, the bright presence, comes to his rescue using his powers, as that would be the only way he could fight and win. It turns out it's a complete loop where Alan writes Zone to come to reality and create this magical backstory and weapon named the Clicker to destroy the dark presence, while Zane writes for Alan to come into reality, defeating the dark place, which was something that was created in the first place by Alice, Alan's wife, as she was hunted by Scratch, the evil doppelganger of Alan. It all in a meticulous, complicated loop, convoluting what is now a reality or fiction, or if all are part of a written story that came to reality as subdimension or parallel universes. Now back to Alan Wake 2 and the Ocean View Hotel. Zane introduces himself as an author and an actor who had a diving suit, wanting to work with Alan on the new book or story called Return. Exploring the environment, Alan soon comes across visions of Saga corresponding to the visions that she had of him in the overlap, which means somehow the Alan that is in the seeming real world is not the real Alan, or that he is an echo or something even more complex, while the real Alan, or at least that's what he thinks, or maybe just another iteration of the multiple stories written in loops, is still in the dark place, who is trying to find a way out, also trying to still save his wife. Managing to go back to the iteration of his apartment, Alan observes the current events happening in the house, how Alice is working on the dark place. Using the computer, things become even more twisted when Barry Wheeler, Alan's agent, suggests to Alice to turn Alan's story into a movie, TV show, or even a video game, which depicts the fourth wall break, how the dark place is spreading like wildfire, creating several parallel universes, creating different iterations of the story and expanding and becoming more powerful. Alan's story even attracted Tammy Booker, the witness, who is a writer to Cauldron Lake, who is writing about Alan as well, which yet again creates more and more reality-changing events, convoluting the story further. Finally, getting to go to the writer's room again, he finds a full manuscript of the Return novel, a story about how the dark presence escapes the dark place and reigns terror over Bright Falls, taking it over, written by none other than Scratch, as Alan doesn't remember any of it. Knowing he has to stay true to the genre and the script, he makes edits, adding the character that he had the visions of, Saga Anderson, making her the hero of the story as she is currently in Bright Falls. This means just as Saga went to Bright Falls investigating the murder of Nightingale, Alan was hard at work editing the manuscript, sending them to Saga while writing. Therefore, the pages were written by Scratch, but Alan was editing it to make Saga the hero to save the story and stop Scratch. Not having enough time to write the ending, Scratch suddenly comes to the writer's room and shoots Alan in the head, killing him, which he saw before in the loop. Alan, however, soon awakens with his memory affected, which could mean every time that he tries to correct and change Scratch's misdeeds, his memory is wiped by Scratch, depicted in him getting shot, or at least that's what it appears to be. The question remains, who is the Alan that is in the real world now with Saga? Having another meeting with the TV show host Dor, he explains that he has enough pretending, talking in riddles that Alan is hurting people, constantly insisting on carrying on, going into different loops and opening new doors, saying that Alan has hurt someone close to Dor, which he stays ambiguous about. Back to Saga, she goes on to investigate about the clicker, going to visit Thor and Odin from a popular rock band known as the Old Gods of Asgard. Going to the care house with people thinking that they are relatives of Saga, saying Thor is her grandfather. She plays along to get to the bottom of it and if she can use the clicker herself. Accessing her mind place, she strongly connects with Odin, one of the rock band members, when she feels as if she might be actually their relative, as she has never connected to anyone like that before, questioning even her mind space, which might be more than just an intuition, maybe a supernatural power which she possesses, as Odin calls her to be a seer, a Viking healer and psychic. Finding out Thor and Odin are not members of the cult, they are specifically being targeted by the cult members and the darkness. He explains the art, stories have the power to change the reality, but with the light switch, the stories crank it up to 100, making the changes much easier and much more noticeable. Thor suddenly gets taken by a take-in in a pond and disappears when Saga uses her mind space communicating with Odin to get more info. When he explains when she was a kid, her mother Freya took her away when she starts considering if she was actually a local in Bright Falls, as it is possible. Saga going to the overlap to free Thor, she battles Cynthia, taken by the dark place, saving Thor. Saga encounters Alan again in visions, who pleads with Alan to write Logan, her daughter, out of the story, not sure if Alan was the one writing her in the story, forcing Saga to get involved in it. Talking to Thor, he explains that they all have the mind space. It is more than she thought it was. They have a power to see the future and to read minds, a power which she can use to resist the dark presence, hence why they aren't taken and that she can actually change the story. Thor explains that she was not a good father to Freya, Saga's mother, hence why she left not looking back, not telling Saga about her grandfather Thor and her great uncle Odin. Freya would dismiss Saga's mind space as make-believe as well, while in fact she fully knew that they have a special power. So it turns out, just how Tom Zane wrote the hero to be someone para-utilitarian, Alan Wake, Alan edited the new story for the hero to be another para-utilitarian, like Saga, to change the story. Thor explains the clicker is not enough and Saga needs to use her talent and art, playing music to manipulate the story, but for that, Alan needs to rewrite the story as well, going all the way back to Tom, who are seemingly interchangeable as they were the creators of the story. Saga going to the place the members of the FBC are in, the sheriff's station, she observes they were severely under attack by the Taken, with Alex Casey still alive, fending off the place and Alan. Even Alex at this point starts believing Logan has drowned, which explains that everyone at this point has become affected by the horror story and she needs to put an end to it, being unaffected and immune to the story thanks to her special Viking seer powers passed down to her through Thor. Going down to the jail cells, just as Saga is about to give Wake the clicker, with all the cult members arrested shouting he is the monster, Alan suddenly alters to his counterpart, Mr. Scratch, revealing he has been Scratch all along, pretending to be Alan, while Alan is still in the dark place, unveiling that the visions Saga was having, communicating with Alan, were concurrent and happening in real time. Alan has been hard at work editing the manuscripts to help Saga defeat this relentless monster in his own shape. She narrowly manages to defeat him temporarily using light projectors who pretended to be Wake to steal the clicker and get rid of any hope of them succeeding. Saga as a result calls Thor, telling him to set the band back together and write a song about bringing Alan back to the real life, so he can rewrite the story and get rid of the dark. On her way, she calls her husband, whom back at home, miles away from Bright Falls, is also affected by the dark place, believing they are separated, with Saga taking Logan, who ends up drowning. Seeing as having no other option, the only way she can save her family and the world, she goes back to the Cauldron Lake alongside FBC to bring Alan back. Saga manages to get to the gig location with the FBC agents there to help when Thor and Odin sing a beautiful song on how Alan gets back to reality from the depths of the Dark Lake. Despite finishing the song with Saga switching the clicker, Alan doesn't come out, making her almost give up hope. Reality shifts and it's now Alan's perspective, who has taken Zane hostage, a mirror reflection of himself, who explains he's a movie maker. He explains he wrote Return with Scratch as Alan was avoiding writing to prevent any other mishaps. As a result, he killed Zane due to him still trying to alter the reality and trap Alan. He goes to a movie that Zane has made called Nightless Night, which seemingly is the cause of Alan being trapped, not being able to leave the dark place. While exploring the cinema, the visions Alan was seeing seems to be directly linked to him, with Alex Casey, the detective of his most successful book series, turns out to be in the Nightless Night movie made by Zane, essentially a fictional movie in a fictional story, written by a fictional character, which had Alex in it, which all were an elaborate plan by the cult members to lure Alan there so they can manipulate him further, even asking him if he is fictional or real. Having another vision and communication with Saga in the overlap, it depicts what Saga's last interaction with him was. Alan explains that he needs to edit Scratch's horror story, using Saga as the hero, yet being ambiguous if it was him who wrote Logan to be a victim of drowning in the story. Further in the dark place, Alan answers another telephone call, this time from himself, from another point in the story, instructing him to do something to help everyone, but nothing that will get out, and at the same time, he won't, being stuck in the dark place forever. It turns out there are many different versions of Alan in a twisted multi-dimension who are all connected to each other. Going to the Parliament Tower apartment, it turns out the apartment has been vacated, where he finds a tape recorded by Alice, who has had enough of the hauntings, which became a lot more severe. This, unfortunately, leads to Alice ending it, as she couldn't take it any longer, quoting that she has to become her own art. Understanding this, Alan ends up in the writer's room, seeing that Scratch is still in the dark place, scratching his edits to make the story he wrote carry on. That's when, in anger and a fit of rage, he rushes towards the Scratch and shoots him dead. But when it's all done, in a moment of clarity, Alan realizes he has been the culprit all along. He is the one who pulled the trigger in a previous scene, thinking it was Scratch trying to stop him editing the story. He has been the one tormenting Alice. It was him all along in a twisted loop, being manipulated by the dark place to stop himself from leaving the dark place. That's when the shadows show how the dark place has completely possessed and corrupted him. It turns out when Saga and the old gods of Asgard sang the song and switched the clicker, they did manage to bring Alan back, but not at this point of time, but in the beginning of the game when Saga first met Alan, thinking it was Scratch. There was no Scratch to begin with. Scratch was gone in the DLC when Alan wrote his destruction. This time around, the one who got out was in fact Alan, with the dark place inside him, possessing him, being an elaborate plan by the dark place to get itself out. Scratch never wrote the story. It was Alan all along, manipulated by the dark place and fighting for his own sanity, going in loops all over, forgetting that he's done any of it. That's when all of a sudden the corrupted Alan Wake shows up, facing Saga heads on, wanting the clicker, the only weapon which could still defeat the dark place. Managing to fight off Alan and pushing the dark place out of him, it suddenly possesses Alex Casey, who takes the clicker and pushes Saga into the lake, which is followed by her family, going into the lake to save her. Perspective changing, Alan talking to the FBC agent, he takes some weapons and takes the responsibility to go to the Bright Falls and save humanity from the dark place, as after all, he brought the dark place with him, causing Alice to die, not knowing if he could break free this time around, yet willing to sacrifice himself for the better good. Stepping into the whirlpool in the air, he enters a different version of Bright Falls, with it being day, welcoming Alan Wake back for another Deer Fest. Following his first visit, now having written the sequel to his first two successful books in the series, departure, and initiation, now being return. Entering the town, he manages to get a copy of the book which would inform him of the ending which he could rewrite and end the terror of the dark place. Alan manages to find his way into the writer's room where he contemplates on how to end the story, knowing full well horror stories have victims and monsters, and to save everyone, the hero must pay a heavy price when he sets and starts on writing, willing to sacrifice himself to save everyone else. But for it to work, he still requires the clicker. Hard at work rewriting the ending, the perspective changed to Saga, who is now trapped in a nightmarish version of her mind space. A heavy voice doubting her decisions, Saga fights them off, overcoming her fears and self-doubts, managing to dive deeper in the dark place to fight it off from within. In this version of the dark place, she encounters Sheriff Breaker, who explains he has been brought here by Warland Door, the mysterious person he's been investigating in order to find his way out. She soon manages to find the clicker and directly communicates with Alan using her mind space, allowing her to help Alan in coming up with an ending where they can all escape and have a good ending. An ending where they have already suffered and paid a heavy price, not earning a good ending. Saga then manages to teleport into the writer's room just on time with Alan having finished the ending. Having the clicker and the bullet of light, she takes the pages, ready to end it all, when Casey comes to the image, overtaken by shadows and the dark place. Alan, having written the ending, willing to sacrifice himself, allows the darkness possess him, when Saga shoots him dead for the darkness to die with him. That's when Saga picks up the phone, calling her daughter Logan to make sure if it's all over, when we are left on a massive cliffhanger with the phone still ringing with no answer. The point where Alan gets shot with the bullet of light is the same when the beginning starts, with Alan having a bullet hole in his head, talking about how horror stories have victims and monsters and the heroes must pay the price. But as a silver lining, the post-credit scenes show Alice explaining that she never died and it was a trick to make Alan do what he did. Alice approached FBC, who guided her, depicting that the dark place is too powerful and Alan needs to keep on repeating the same loop over and over again until he sees the clues and the light Alice provided him, as she remembered everything that happened to her in the lake. Alan awakens, understanding this time around, after who knows how many years or how long of looping, that this is not a loop but a spiral to Ascension, as the destruction part has been done, with the dark presence seemingly getting destroyed. So now he needs to keep on climbing to get out. So according to the ending, there definitely will be a sequel, or at least a DLC or multiple, where Alan hopefully gets out, because at this point I'm getting personally really upset about it. We still need to figure out what will happen to Sheriff Breaker, who is Warland Door and what is he looking for, what will come out of Odin and Thor when they went to the lake, and how will Alan actually escape. Anyway, this is the end of the video. Hope that you enjoyed it. It's been your host Star, and I will see you on another video.